Searching for Sugar Man. So, we were talking before about a documentary about avant-garde food, which I think I got you to confess. I mean, I thought it was terribly dull. And
don't go and see it.
And yeah, exactly. The honest truth of it, it's boring. So, Searching for Sugar Man, which is a music documentary about a singer-songwriter called Rodriguez. And I have to say at the beginning, I had no prior knowledge of Rodriguez at all. Did you?
No.
Okay, fine.
Never heard of him.
And it has to be said, the less you know about the subject, the better. So the story is Rodriguez, a.k.a. Jesus Rodriguez, a.k.a. Sixto Jesus Rodriguez, recorded a couple of albums in the early 70s called Cold Facts and Coming From Reality. The sound, we hear them in the documentary, sound a little bit like Bob Dylan, kind of Cat Stevens edge to it. He looks a little bit like Richie Valens, but like with a kind of more hippie edge.
Yeah.
Looks very cool. And it was decided that it was discovered in a bar, playing with his back turned to the audience. And we hear in the documentary about how the people that signed him, we went to this bar, they talk about going through the smoke of Detroit and arriving in this bar, and the whole bar was smoky and misty and they couldn't see anything. And they finally see the back of this guy who isn't even turning to address the audience. So this is the kind of this air of mystery around him. Got signed to a major label, made 2 albums that everyone thought were going to absolutely make him the new Bob Dylan, the new Cat Stevens, and nothing happened.
Tanked completely. And apparently, at least from what we know from the documentary, they didn't just tank, they just properly disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, in a peculiar twist, his records started to become popular in South Africa sometime later. And his records were picked up. Firstly, they arrived as bootlegs, then his records started being distributed there. And it turns out, from a guy in South Africa, Stephen Sugar Seegerman, who ended up being called Sugar Man as a bizarre reference to Rodriguez, tells this story about how his records were really, really famous. They were famous enough in South Africa that the record stations would actually scratch individual tracks to stop them being played. And the belief was that he was a huge recording artist everywhere else, and that they just thought this was... Only later on did they realise that not only was he not a huge recording artist anywhere, that pretty much nothing else was known about him. And very early on, we hear that the reason nothing else was known about him was that his career was incredibly short-lived and ended very tragically. Here's a clip.
It's 40 years since this LP called Cold Fact by Rodriguez was released. And in South Africa, it was a very popular album. It was one of the biggest albums of the day. But the thing was, we didn't know who this guy was. All our other rock stars, we had all the information we needed. But this guy, it was nothing. And then we found out that he had committed suicide. He set himself alight on stage and burned to death in front of the audience. It was the most incredible thing. It wasn't just a suicide, it was probably the most grotesque suicide in rock history.
Now, of course, this comes very, very early in the film, and you're immediately asked to think this is an urban legend. This isn't one, because you also then immediately hear another story. No, that's not what happened. What happened was he died of a drugs overdose. And then somebody, no, that's not what happened. He died in mysterious circumstances at home on his own. What's clear is that, at least as far as the South African edge of this story is concerned, nobody knew. Now, when I went... Every now and then you see a documentary that starts to tell you a story that you're so surprised that you don't know any of it that you start to wonder whether it's made up.
Yeah.
Because people have done spoof documentaries in the past. I mean, famously, everyone thinks that, there are stories that some people saw Spinal Tap in America and genuinely thought that...
Well, the story is Liam Gallagher walked out of seeing it.
Oh, is that right?
They were rubbish, so he walked out.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that. But that itself may well be an apocryphal.
It's probably not true, but it'll do.
In order for the film to work, what you have to do is you have to understand, you have to buy into the central conceit, which is firstly not a conceit. I don't know anything about it. It seems to me that an awful lot of people here in the UK do not know about Rodriguez and have never heard his records, certainly haven't heard it, which you then start hearing at the beginning and you wonder why they didn't do well, because actually they sound like exactly the kind of material that would have done well. More importantly, you have to believe that as far as his success in South Africa was concerned, and this from all the contributors in South Africa all to talk about this, that they talk about the being very, very isolated, that as a result of the censorship of apartheid, and this is obviously the pre-internet age, the story begins in the pre-internet age, they genuinely knew nothing at all, but what they did think was, he's huge, he's massive everywhere, because he's selling as many records over here as Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan and all the rest of it. Why don't we know anything else? And what the story then does is to try and find out from the perspective of these people in South Africa who first championed him,
what exactly did happen to this recording artist. And I think it's only fair to say, firstly, that we shan't go on to dive.
No.
Clearly, if you know anything about Rodriguez, the story is out there. And if you want, you can go to a Wikipedia page and you can find out about it if you want to do that. My advice would be, if you're going to go and see the film, don't
do that. Yeah.
It's very clear from the beginning, because of the way the film is made, and it's correctly so, that what you're told at the beginning isn't right, but the answer to what is right is, it's set up like there's a character surrounded by urban myth, but therefore there's a very interesting cause of what is beneath the urban myth. Now, some critics have also complained that in the manner of a film like Catfish, remember Catfish was this documentary about somebody having an online relationship with somebody who may or may not be what they seem, so they decide to go on the road and go and meet the person, and then they finally find the person. It turns out they're completely something else. And one of the criticisms levelled at that film was, well, it's kind of complicit in the deception, because the filmmakers know that she isn't what she says she is, and therefore the whole thing is kind of swayed. And some people have said, well, actually there are sections of the story of Rodriguez, like for particularly, sections that involve Australia, for example, that have deliberately been left out in order to make the narrative work. I don't have a problem with that, because in order for the film to work, it has to take the perspective of people who were growing up in an environment in which all they knew was, he's a very big rock star, everyone knows these records, they mean a lot to us, and we know nothing about him. Now, clearly, if you want to start picking holes in it, and if you want to start saying, actually, I want to look outside of this perspective, yes, the whole thing will fall.
You can do that if you want.
You can do that, and the film will...
But you know what? Don't do that.
We don't do that because the difference between it and Catfish, I think, is... I think the film takes a very deliberate view, which is, we are looking at it from this perspective, which I genuinely believe in, because there are too many people... fans in South Africa saying, we thought the records were everywhere, we thought it was huge everywhere, and we thought that nobody knew anything at all.
It's the thing, you go to a white liberal party in South Africa and they have Abbey Road, Bridge Over Troubled Water and Cold Fact by Rodriguez.
Yes, which is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, of those three albums, absolutely, that's the trio, because you go, yes, pardon.
Yeah.
And also that all the musicians talk about his songs being encouraging them to be anti-establishment, encouraging them to rise up against a party. I mean, they're very, they fit very much into the kind of general protest song. There's a song that's an anti-establishment song. There's songs about, about illegal chemicals. There's songs about poverty. There's all that sort of stuff. But these songs seem to have struck a particular chord. And it's what's fascinating about the story, and I would say this for the people who say it's a contrived documentary because actually it deliberately withholds things in the way that a magician would, to do a magic trick. I haven't shown you this card. You know why? Because I'm going to show it to you later, and then it'll be more surprising. It's very deliberately taking as its centre, even more so than his story, the story of people for whom his records became incredibly important, but couldn't find out anything about him, regardless of what may be happening in the rest of the world. So I thought it was, you could kind of see where it was going, and that's fine. But I was really impressed by it. There was a good piece of storytelling. Plus, didn't you think, why wasn't he big?
Well, why did these records not break out? That is very peculiar, because they are almost pastiche of sort of post Donovan Dylan protest stuff.
To the point that didn't you at some point, like I did, think, is this
real?
Yeah.
Come off it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you're actually saying there is, why not treat this film as a story that you don't know the ending to, like Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises.
Exactly.
So don't go looking up the true story, because the true story is good enough told from this perspective, so let the film do its work.
I think it's the story of people discovering something and being genuinely interested in it, and wanting to do that thing that everyone said, to go on a journey, a personal journey of personal discoverification on the journey of the personality.
Yeah, but not quite like that. But it's more sincere than that.
No,
personal journification.
No, I think that what they're doing is not that. Sorry, the thing I was sneering at was with that being the sort of the standard. Sorry, I just sound like I'm sneering at everything, Al. I wasn't meaning to sneer.
Not completely.
Not completely. What I also think is fascinating is that character that they of this 70s recording artist making these early albums, is that the reason he's interesting is that image that's evoked at the beginning of them going into a bar and seeing a guy with his back turned to the audience actually resonates all the way through the film, because the one thing that's apparent is that he actually didn't seek fame.
Yeah.
He actually didn't seek fortune. He genuinely wasn't that bothered
Yes.
But and what's most surprising is finding somebody who is a singer-songwriter for whom it may not be the most important thing in the world.
Yeah. That's quite... Yes. And that... Yes, that in a way is the reveal. Oh, it's also what a cussed business show business is, because all these there's all these people who discovered him, who go on to be the best singer and the best writer since Dylan. Where is he now? I don't know.
Yeah, and then certainly there's a couple of people when they're interviewed, they're almost in tears.
Yeah.